Hello ladies and gentlemen, Gavesty here. This is the tank guide for Mythic Twin Ogron. And the good news is that tanking this fight is not all that different from the heroic version. The new mechanics that you will see generally don't impact the tanks significantly. So mostly your focus will be on proper positioning, which you may not need to pay much attention to on lower difficulties, but matters significantly especially depending on your raid strategy for Mythic. So the first new mechanic is the Empowered Whirlwind, which is just like the regular one, except it will suck players toward Enfeebling. So there you can see it's the first, fourth, and fifth Whirlwind casts of the fight that are always empowered. The other two are always normal. So just be aware of this as a tank. Both tanks obviously get pulled toward him. For the Enfeebling tank, it doesn't matter, you already need to be there. But it may impact your ability to dodge fire slightly, so just be aware of that. So the empowerment ability for pull is charge. And again, you can see the list of charge throughout the fight, which ones are normal, which ones are empowered. Empowerment simply creates 3 duplicates of pull that will charge out in the 3 other cardinal directions that pull is not charging himself. So essentially, he will charge in the 4 exact cardinal directions based on his original facing when he starts to charge himself. The 3 copies are delayed slightly, which generally doesn't matter, but it does give you at least the opportunity to kind of see more clearly where the 3 are coming out once he actually goes. But just avoid it by standing in one of the diagonals. It's always exactly the 4 cardinal directions, so you can just stand a diagonal to avoid that. And getting hit by one of the copies is exactly the same in terms of debuff as if you were hit by Pull himself. I'll also briefly mention the final new ability, which is Arcane Volatility. However, this does not directly affect tanks at all. It targets random raid members that are not tanks, essentially, and will cause them to explode in 8 yards after 6 seconds. But tanks should not need to think about this ability at all. It's up to the other raid members to handle it properly. So the actual bread and butter of this fight, particularly for tanks, is all about positioning. So first let's talk about the flames from Quake. Now this is a rough sketch, very rough, apologies, of sort of the top-down view of how the flames from the 2 Quake weapons work. And essentially what they do is there are 3 streams of flames coming out from any given weapon, and those streams will emanate out in pulses, but each pulse is slightly rotated counterclockwise from the previous pulse. So you can kind of see the aftermath or afterglow in this image of how the waves rotate counterclockwise throughout that phase. So it means that the final wave spurts of fire from a weapon will be going far further counterclockwise than the original first 2 wave spurts. And, you know, differences or subsequent differences between the first and the last are adjusted accordingly. Now, for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to assume that your raid is using the same strategy as far as positioning that we are in the video here. If you want to know more about the other strategies, there are basically 3 different methods you can use potentially. Click on the Mythic, purple Mythic link in the bottom there and go to the section that talks about the positioning there in the description. But just to keep things succinct in this video, I'm just going to talk about the actual method that we're using here. The general idea behind this method is because the pattern of the fire from the weapons is always known, the raid as a whole will position themselves with pull behind the nearest weapon so that the flames that need to be dodged are only coming from the weapon on the opposite side. And you can see we sort of slip through the gap there. And once we have dodged that kind of first wave from the opposite weapon, that's it. You don't have to really think about fire anymore for the rest of the Quake phase, which is a huge advantage. This means that the tank that's on pull, along with all the melee and of course all the ranged and healers, really don't have any danger represented by fire if you do it properly. Meanwhile, the tank that is on Enfeebling can then utilize the center of the room and never really have to worry about pulling Enfeebling away from the raid. Because if you're positioned in some of the other methods, again, you can check the other full raid guide video for that. The difficulty can be for the Phemos tank to actually pull Phemos out before Whirlwind without getting tons of fire damage on him or herself. So by using this method, the Phemos tank can simply stay in the center and dodge the fire to his or her capabilities without worrying about the positioning relative to the raid. So as we start off a Quake phase, you want to immediately identify where the weapon is that your group's going to go to. So here you can see on the top right there is the nearest weapon that we're going to go to. The range group here, the entire group, just behind red in front of the boss. And so you can start making your way over there to the right side, but you can't just go straight across because you'll risk hitting flames that are coming out. So instead you need to make sure you curve kind of around the back side, of course, make your way to the right of that weapon. So now that we've actually identified the weapon position, we call it out and mumble, and everyone moves over that direction. And now we're getting ready to go through the gap for the flames. So now that we've moved to the right of the weapon, you can kind of see it, it's under the boss there. And of course the raid group here. You need to identify the opposite weapon location. So the far weapon's in the top of the screen there, you can kind of see it there. And therefore the center flame lines that are coming out from it. So here's the second flame that came out from the center, and right here to our left is the first one. It's going to pass right behind the boss here. So the idea is the raid group needs to find the gap between the first and the second flame. So here's the gap there, and go between it. So we're going, when it passes from us, we're going to just kind of curve and go straight through it there. And then we'll be sort of behind the weapon that we were near, and you can stay there for the rest of the Quake phase until the fire dissipates. So just like the rest of the raid, if you are the pole tank, you need to do the same basic action. The important thing is to make sure you watch the timers so you know when Quake is coming up, and then to move pole out toward wherever the range position is at the time. So for us, that was generally by the red marker to start off with, which is just opposite where the mobs spawn. And then once pole is out there and Phemos is in the center still, then pole can be moved with the raid group to behind whichever weapon we're using for that safety marker. And then you run through the gap, and then you can stay there with pole for the rest of that flame phase. Once the flames are gone, then you can move pole back to the center so you can get more cleave damage between the two Ogron. The important thing to note is that while these guys do gain extra damage based on the distance they are apart from one another, even using this method, because Phemos is kept in the center, you're not really going to create a larger gap than you would if you just did another strategy, which you may be more used to, which involves pole staying stationary and Phemos being pulled away. So ultimately, the damage intake is the same on the tanks, but this method is much easier for pretty much everyone involved, perhaps excluding the Phemos tank, but even our tank said that it was fine, and I think it was much easier for him because he didn't have to worry about the positioning of everyone else so much. Now, generally speaking, most of the crazy combinations of abilities from the bosses don't really pertain to tanks on this fight, with one exception, and that is the combination of Charge Cast number 5, which is empowered, along with Enfeebling Roar from Phemos number 4. The reason this is a difficult combination, particularly if you're using this positioning strategy that we are, is that the tendency will be that Phemos is in the center and pole is out toward the range group, which is the standard setup. However, or even both of them are in the center, because you don't have Quake coming up. The problem is that it can be difficult for your raid members to dodge the empowered charge, since it's all 4 charge directions, and then get back into 20-yard radius of Phemos before the enfeebling, because they happen almost instantaneously. You can see the close occurrence of the two there. So what this means is that if you are using this positioning strategy, before this combination actually occurs, you want to swap tank positions from the standard. So you want to take pole into the center of the room and have Phemos pulled out to their ranged raid position. And this way, you can then have an easier time dodging the charges just because the safety gap is going to be much larger the further away you are from the center. And once you dodge those charges, you can be really close to Phemos right after. So even if a charge goes right through Phemos' position, you can easily just sidestep it a yard or two and then be back next to Phemos before the shout actually occurs, the roar occurs. So this is the critical time to be aware that you and your tank partner need to swap positions and do the opposite of what you normally do. The easiest way to remember it, we found, is following Whirlwind number 4, which is the second empowered Whirlwind, so that'll kind of jog your memory. Once that is over, you're basically going to be done with that Quake as well. That's when you want to swap, and you'll be coming up to this crazy combination at that time. So you can just take Phemos out, keep pulling the center, have your raid stack up your Phemos, and do all that good stuff. And that should really cover it for the tank guide for Twin Ogron on Mythic. As I mentioned at the beginning, most of the new mechanics don't impact tanks in the slightest, and I believe a lot of it is because the fight was changed mechanically, sometime during testing or whatever, because there are new arcane versions of some of the debuffs that they apply to tanks that should be dangerous if they stacked up, but they don't. They don't occur fast enough to actually stack up, so you never need to swap tanking or anything like that. So I don't know, but whatever the intent was, like I said, it's pretty simple to tank. The only thing to be aware of is your overall positioning relative to the raid strategy, dodging fire appropriately, particularly for the Phemos tank if you're in the center. Just get used to the pattern. It's the same every time. And so you can just kind of follow the open gaps between flames to one side of the room or the other, and then go back to the middle afterward. And then that special charge number 5 and enfeebling number 4 combo to swap it out. So that should do it. As always, thanks for watching. Good luck, and I'll see you next time.